at news organizations all the way from NPR to Newsmax kind of coming together all to say we're not feeling these new restrictions that the White House is putting on news organizations, and now it looks like they've given them a deadline, and it's less than an hour here, is it not?
That's right. That's right. It's the deadline to sign is 5 p.m. Eastern, 4 Central. I don't know exactly what's going to happen if media members don't sign this. Somebody that may know a thing or two about this is the VP of Policy at the Reporters Committee for Freedom of the Press, Mr. Gabe Rottman. Gabe, welcome to the afternoon shift. How are you, sir?
Good. Thanks for having me.
Thanks so much for joining. Can you just tell us more about this new policy that's in place from the Trump administration on restrictions at the Pentagon?
Sure. So basically what we're talking about here is the credential that'll get you regular access to the Pentagon, right? So it's most people can apply for temporary visitor credentials, but journalists can get a credential that gives them 24/7 access to the Pentagon. Historically, the Pentagon has been pretty open to the press. Obviously, you can't go into classified areas, but you can walk the halls and you can talk to people, and you go into offices and talk to Department of War personnel. And what the department has done is, usually or historically, in order to get the credential, you would basically sign a form that said, I understand you could search my bag when I'm coming and going, and that if I pose a security risk, physically, then you can revoke my credential. But over the past few weeks, the Pentagon put in place a new policy and required journalists to sign it in order to get this credential. Initially, the new policy was read as requiring journalists to actually run their articles or stories through the Pentagon before publishing. The Pentagon clarified that that's not what the policy was meant to say, but they revised it in a way where journalists are now concerned, one, that the policy gags Department of War personnel from talking to journalists, even about things that aren't sensitive, about innocuous information. And there's concern that journalists who sign could have their credentials revoked in retaliation for their reporting. So that's driving the concern, and those are the reasons why we've seen news organizations not signing the new form.
And obviously the deadline is coming up pretty quickly here, but I'm curious, has the administration shown kind of any willingness to possibly back down from this deadline? Because like we highlighted a little bit earlier, I mean, it's almost every notable news organization out there has come out with some sort of statement within the last day or two saying that they're not going to sign this and be a part of this. And obviously that would be a huge problem for the White House and for these new news organizations. So is there some type of negotiations going on behind the scenes where we see like a midnight deal?
Well, the Pentagon has been engaged, with my organization, the Reporters Committee, as well as the Pentagon Press Association. I can't speak to whether there's going to be, any movement, on the Department of War side. I would say that the Pentagon Press Association, in both of its statements, has urged the Pentagon to reconsider.
Gabe, what would you say are the and I believe we still have Gabe. Yeah, is Gabe still there?
Yep.
Oh, yes. Yeah, Gabe, what would you say are the political points that the Trump administration is trying to score with this? Like, why do it? Why it's not often that you're going to get, media organizations from across the political aisle to agree on something like this. What are the political ramifications of doing this?
Yeah, I can't really speak to the motivation of the department in putting out this new policy. It does follow moves to restrict reporter access to certain parts of the Pentagon that they were allowed to go into before. But this particular policy, the reason why there's so much concern over it is that it characterizes ordinary news gathering activity, right? Pursuing sources, asking for information, including unclassified information that's not sensitive. And it characterizes those as a potential national security risk and a reason why you could lose your credential. And I think that's why you've seen news organizations, that are perceived at different points on the ideological spectrum, standing fast and saying that they won't sign this policy.
Is there any precedent for anything like this? I feel like this is we're kind of in unprecedented territory. I mean, obviously, naturally, there's been a lot of, back and forth between Trump and the media throughout his entire political career, but this seems like an unprecedented level of kind of restriction on journalism, and journalism kind of pushing back as well.
Well, certainly in terms of the restrictions on access to the Pentagon. I mean, this is the second largest office building in the world. I mean, and it also, it has things like pharmacies, it has fast food restaurants in it. Again, reporters, there was obviously places that they couldn't go, but reporters had a fair amount of access, and that's through administrations of both parties, going back decades. And certainly this particular policy, again, used to be the restrictions on photography, restrictions on certain places where you could go or not go. But it was like a one-page form, and now they've replaced it with this, 17-page policy, which again has language in it that places really severe restrictions on the ability of Department of War personnel to even interact with journalists. And then it raises the concern that journalists could have their credentials revoked in retaliation for their reporting. So certainly when we're talking about access to the Pentagon, this is, we haven't seen something like this before.
Gabe, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth said yesterday on X that Pentagon access is a privilege, not a right. What would you say to that?
Well, there's a legal question there, and then there's also just the practical experience that journalists have had, and again as a legal matter, once the administration or the Pentagon has opened the facility up to journalists, there's a few things that it can't do. It can't kick them out because it doesn't like the journalism, and it can't exactly pick and choose between journalistic organizations. But when it comes to privilege, not a right, I think certainly, journalists have a First Amendment right not to be retaliated against because of what they report, and that's core to our First Amendment protections, and then also, we're talking about an institution that is funded to the tune of almost $1 trillion a year, and that has had a pretty successful relationship with journalists going back decades. And so the restrictions, aside from the comment about privilege or a right, these restrictions both hurt the public by denying journalists access to important public interest news stories, and then they also raise the risk that accountability can suffer for this massive institution.
What happens next from here? What will happen to these entities that don't sign as it stands right now? And have any of these news organizations come out and kind of said like how their coverage of things? Because obviously it can't just end, right? It's one of the most important buildings, and there's lots of important stuff coming out of there every single day. But how will these entities continue to cover the Pentagon without that access?
Yeah, and I think you've seen a lot of news organizations say, "Look, we'll do our job to the best of our ability from outside of the building." And there's plenty of reporting that can occur from outside the building. So in terms of what happens next, today's the deadline to decide to sign or not. And then if you don't sign, you need to hand in your credentials by tomorrow. So the practical effect is there'll be fewer reporters physically reporting from the Pentagon. The long-term effect could be, as I say, a real risk to transparency and accountability for a major governmental institution.
Gabe, if the Pentagon is today, what's next? The White House potentially? You think there could be a ripple effect here?
Well, so I think and a lot of news organizations have also pointed this out, right? That no other government agency, the Department of State, other agencies with national security responsibilities, and the White House, that none of them are requiring journalists to sign something that effectively says that ordinary journalism could be a national security risk, and requiring journalists to say, I understand that, and I understand that my credential could be revoked, just for me doing my job. So, so far this is unique to the Pentagon, and while the White House, there has been the case now, a legal case involving the Associated Press, and their removal from something called the press pool because of an editorial choice. There was that, but we haven't seen anything like what is happening now with this policy at the Pentagon that characterizes ordinary news gathering as a national security risk.
Gabe Rottman, the VP of Policy at the Reporters Committee for Freedom of the Press. Mr. Rottman, we appreciate your time. Thank you so much.